My sister called the police on my 6-year-old son, accused him of attacking her baby out of jealousy. But what the neighbor's security camera revealed left everyone speechless, and what followed was even worse. Hey Reddit, my sister called the cops on my 6-year-old kid, claiming he tried to hurt her baby. Turned out the neighbor's camera caught the whole thing, and it wasn't what anyone expected. What happened after? That's where things got really messed up. Buckle up! I'm Daniel, 35, and this happened back in April at my parents' place in suburban Minneapolis. Before I get into the disaster, you need to understand the setup. My wife Julie and I have one kid, Ethan, who just turned 6. Smart kid, quiet, the type who'd rather build with blocks than start trouble. My sister Nina is 3 years younger than me, married to some finance guy who's always traveling for work. Nina had just had her first baby 3 months earlier, a girl named Sophie. My parents were over the moon about their first grandchild. I mean, obsessed level. My mom Janet was taking approximately 4,000 photos per visit, showing them to everyone in her book club. My dad Frank had turned into one of those grandpas who tells everyone at the hardware store about his granddaughter. That Sunday in April, we all gathered at my parents' house for what was supposed to be a nice family lunch, spring weather. Sun coming through the windows. The whole Norman Rockwell setup. Nina was staying there temporarily since her husband Mike was on some business trip in Boston. She'd moved back home for help with the baby, which made sense given she was a new mom doing it solo during the week. The house smelled like the waffles Mom always makes for special occasions. Everyone was crowded around Sophie's crib in the living room, cooing over every tiny movement the baby made. Dad was holding Sophie, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Mom was snapping photos from every angle. Nina and Julie were standing together, talking about baby stuff. Meanwhile, Ethan was sitting on a stool in the corner by himself. Kid's legs were too short to touch the ground, just swinging there while everyone ignored him. I noticed he kept glancing at the crowd around the crib, then looking down at his hands. That's when I knew something was off. I've always been good at reading my kid. When you're a parent, you develop this radar for when your child's not okay. Ethan wasn't throwing a tantrum or demanding attention. He was just quietly processing being invisible. That's actually worse than acting out, because it means the kid's already given up on being noticed. He tugged my sleeve and looked up at me with those big eyes kids have when they're trying not to cry. Dad, do they like the baby more than me? That question hit me like a punch to the chest. I sat down, pulled him close, told him he was the most important thing in my life and nobody could replace him. Standard dad reassurance. But I could see Nina watching us from across the room with this look on her face. She walked over to Julie and said something I could barely hear but definitely caught. Don't you think your son is jealous of Sophie? He keeps staring at her. Julie's response was immediate and firm. Ethan's just adjusting to having a baby around. He's never had issues with other kids. He's actually very gentle. Before the tension could escalate, my phone rang. It was the insurance adjuster about our roof damage from the storm the previous week. We'd been waiting 2 weeks for this appointment, and they needed to inspect immediately, or we'd lose our claim window. Julie and I exchanged looks. We couldn't miss this. After a quick discussion, we decided to leave Ethan with my parents and Nina. It was supposed to be an hour, maybe 90 minutes tops. Frank and Janet had watched Ethan dozens of times. The kid loved staying with his grandparents. They spoiled him, let him stay up late, fed him snacks before dinner. No reason to think this would be any different. I knelt down to Ethan's level before we left. Mom and Dad will be back in an hour. You can play puzzles with Grandma and Grandpa, okay? He nodded, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. That uneasy feeling was there in my gut, but I pushed it aside. Where's safer than family? That's what I kept telling myself as Julie and I drove to meet the insurance guy. We pulled up to Mr. Patterson's house about 20 minutes later. He was this older guy, probably close to retirement, who'd been handling insurance claims in the area for decades. We sat down in his living room, and he started explaining the claim process, showing us photos of the roof damage, walking through the paperwork standard stuff. Julie was taking careful notes because she's always been the organized one in our relationship. I was about to sign the initial claim form when my phone started buzzing like crazy. Nina's name popped up. I felt annoyed. We were in the middle of something important, and whatever she wanted could wait an hour. Sorry, I need to take this, I told Mr. Patterson, stepping into his hallway. The second I answered, Nina's voice came through the phone like a scream. Your son deliberately tried to hurt my baby. I stood there, frozen, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I just heard. My brain couldn't make sense of it. What are you talking about? Are you joking? I'm not joking. Nina's voice was shaking with rage. I went to the kitchen to warm Sophie's bottle. When I came back, I saw Ethan pushing her off the crib onto the floor. Everything went cold, My entire body felt like someone had dumped ice water over me. No, that's impossible. There's some kind of misunderstanding. Ethan would never do that. Nina didn't let me finish. There's no misunderstanding, I called the police. They're on their way. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Police. My sister had called the police on my 6-year-old son. Julie saw my face go pale and rushed over, trying to understand what was happening. Nina, Ethan is 6 years old. He can't. She cut me off again. I know your son is jealous of Sophie. I saw how he looked at her all morning. He was staring at her constantly. Julie grabbed the phone from my shaking hand. My wife's face had gone white, but her voice was steady and hard. Nina, what are you saying? Ethan is a good kid. He wouldn't hurt anyone. I could hear Nina's response even though the phone wasn't on speaker. I saw what I saw. The baby fell because of him. I'm not taking any chances with my daughter's safety. Julie's jaw clenched. We're coming back right now. Don't you dare do anything until we get there. She hung up and immediately started gathering her things. Mr. Patterson stood in his doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in his living room. I apologized, said we had an emergency, told him we'd reschedule. He was understanding, but I could barely focus on his words. The drive back to my parents' house took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing through scenarios. What actually happened? How could Nina think Ethan would hurt a baby? My kid had never shown aggressive behavior toward anyone, let alone an infant. He'd been around other babies at daycare, at friends' houses. Never once had an incident. Julie kept repeating, "This is insane. This is completely insane." Nina's lost her mind. When we pulled up to the house, there were 2 police cars in the driveway. 2. Like my 6-year-old was some kind of threat that required backup. I felt sick seeing those vehicles, knowing what they represented, knowing my son was inside, probably terrified out of his mind. We practically ran to the front door. The scene inside was exactly what nightmares are made of. 2 police officers stood in the living room. One was older, probably mid-50s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. The younger one looked barely out of the academy, standing there with his notepad out like he was documenting a major crime scene. Nina was sitting on the couch holding Sophie, who was crying. My sister's face was red and puffy from crying, mascara running down her cheeks. She looked at me when I walked in, and I saw accusation in her eyes. Actual accusation, like I'd raised some kind of monster. My parents stood there looking shell-shocked. Mom was wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. Dad's face was red, that vein in his forehead pulsing the way it does when he's angry and trying to control it. And Ethan. My son was huddled in the corner behind the armchair, his small body shaking. Silent tears were running down his face, but he wasn't making any sound. That silence was worse than screaming. It meant he'd gone into complete shutdown mode. The older officer turned to us as we entered. "Are you the child's parents?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Daniel. This is my wife, Julie. What's going on?" "We received a call about a child endangerment incident," the officer explained, his tone professional but not unkind. "Your sister reported that your son pushed her infant daughter, causing the baby to fall from a crib." Julie immediately started toward Ethan, but Nina stood up, still holding Sophie. "Stay away from him. He tried to kill my baby." "Kill?" Julie's voice went up an octave. "Nina, you're talking about a 6-year-old child." The older officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, I need everyone to calm down. We're trying to establish what happened." I looked at my dad. "What did you see?" Frank's face was conflicted, torn between his daughters and his grandson. "I was in the kitchen with your mother. We heard Nina screaming and came running." "So you didn't actually see what happened?" Julie said, her voice sharp. "I saw Ethan standing near the crib," Nina insisted, "and Sophie was on the floor crying. What more do I need to see? Maybe the part where he allegedly pushed her?" Julie shot back. "Or are we just making assumptions based on a 6-year-old standing in a room?" The younger officer looked uncomfortable. This was probably not the domestic call he'd expected when he rolled up. "We need to speak with the child. Is that your son in the corner?" I nodded, then walked slowly toward Ethan. My son looked up at me with absolute terror in his eyes. His little hands were clenched into fists, his whole body rigid. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. Dad's here." "I didn't hurt the baby," he whispered, voice so small I barely heard it. "I promise, Dad. I didn't hurt her." "I know you didn't," I said, pulling him into a hug. He collapsed against me, finally letting out the sobs he'd been holding in. The older officer knelt down to our level, his expression softening slightly. "Son, can you tell me what happened?" "Take your time." Ethan looked at me, then at the officer, then back at me. I nodded, encouraging him to speak. My son's voice was shaky but determined. I was playing with my cars. The baby started crying in her crib. Aunt Nina went to the kitchen. I heard a weird sound like something hitting the side of the crib. I looked over and the baby was falling. I ran over and tried to catch her, but I couldn't. She fell on the carpet. That's when Aunt Nina came back and started yelling at me. The story came out in fragments, the way kids tell stories, but it was clear and consistent. Nina shook her head violently. That's not what happened. I came back and saw him pushing her. You came back after, Julie pointed out. So you didn't actually see him push her. You saw him near the crib after the baby had already fallen. Nina's face flushed darker. I know what I saw. You know what you think you saw, I corrected. There's a difference. This is ridiculous, Nina said, turning to the officers. Are you going to do something or just let them defend their violent child? The older officer looked between all of us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Ma'am, based on what we're hearing, there's no clear evidence of intentional harm. The child's account seems plausible. Plausible? Nina's voice went shrill. My baby could have been seriously hurt. She could have died. Is the baby injured? The officer asked calmly. Nina hesitated. She has a small bump on her head. Did you take her to be examined by a medical professional? Not yet, but... So you called the police before confirming the extent of any injury, Julie said, her voice cold. And you accused a 6-year-old of assault without actually witnessing what happened. I'm her mother. I have every right to protect my child. And we're his parents, I said, my patience finally snapping. And you just traumatized our son by calling the police on him for something you didn't even see. The situation was escalating fast. Everyone was talking over each other. Dad tried to play peacemaker but wasn't helping. Mom was crying harder. The younger officer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Ethan was clinging to me, his whole body trembling. Then there was a knock at the door. Everyone went quiet. The older officer opened it, and there stood our neighbor from 2 houses down, Robert. Robert was this retired guy, maybe 70, who'd lived on the street longer than anyone. He was holding something in his hand. Officer, I'm sorry to interrupt, Robert said, his voice apologetic but firm. But I think I might have something relevant to this situation. I have security cameras on my property that cover part of the street and my neighbor's yards. When I saw the police cars, I checked my footage from this afternoon. Nina's face went pale. The officer's eyebrows went up. You have footage of what happened? I believe so. My camera has a view of the Reynolds' living room window. I can see inside when the curtains are open. He held up a tablet. Would you like to see? The room fell into absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Nina was frozen, still holding Sophie. My parents looked at each other with dawning realization. Julie squeezed my shoulder. Yes, sir, the older officer said. That would be very helpful. Robert walked in and set his tablet on the coffee table. Everyone gathered around except Ethan, who stayed behind me. Robert pulled up the video and pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. You could see through my parents' living room window. There was the crib, positioned near the window for natural light. Sophie was lying in it, tiny arms moving. The timestamp showed it was from about 45 minutes earlier. On screen, you could see Ethan playing with toy cars on the floor several feet away from the crib. He was completely focused on his toys, making them crash into each other the way kids do. Then Sophie started crying. You couldn't hear it on the footage, but you could see her face scrunching up and her arms flailing. Ethan looked up at the sound. He watched the crib for a moment, then went back to his toys. A minute later, Nina walked across the frame toward what must have been the kitchen. Ethan continued playing. Then something happened. Sophie's movements became more active, her little arms and legs kicking. The crib was one of those older models, wooden with slatted sides. As Sophie kicked, you could see the crib starting to rock slightly. Her movements got stronger, and suddenly she rolled toward the edge of the crib. Ethan looked up. You could see his head snap toward the crib. Then his small body jumped up and ran toward it. He reached the crib just as Sophie's weight shifted over the edge. His little hands reached out, trying to grab her, but he was too small and too late. The baby fell, and Ethan stumbled forward, his hands grabbing at empty air. He immediately knelt down next to where Sophie had fallen, and you could see his mouth moving, probably calling for Nina. That's when Nina came running into frame. The video showed her picking up Sophie, then turning to Ethan with her mouth open, clearly yelling. Ethan backed away, his hands up in a defensive posture. The video ended. The silence in the room was deafening. Nina stood there, her face ash gray, still holding Sophie. The evidence was right there. Undeniable. My son hadn't pushed the baby. He'd tried to save her. Well, the older officer said, his voice carefully neutral. That certainly clarifies things. Nina's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the tablet, then at Ethan, then back at the tablet. Her face crumpled, tears starting to flow again, but this time from what looked like shame instead of anger. My dad was the first one to move. He walked over to Ethan, his movements slow and heavy, like he'd aged 20 years in the last minute. He knelt down in front of his grandson, and his voice cracked when he spoke. Ethan, I'm so sorry. Grandpa was wrong. I should have believed you. Ethan looked at his grandfather with those huge, wounded eyes. Kids are resilient, but they also remember everything my son would remember this day for the rest of his life. The day his family thought the worst of him. The older officer cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, given this evidence, were withdrawing the complaint. There was no intentional harm, and it appears your son actually attempted to prevent injury to the infant. He looked at Nina, his expression hardening slightly. Ma'am, I understand maternal instinct, but false reports waste police resources and can have serious consequences. Nina nodded mutely, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Robert started gathering his tablet. My mom went up to him, her voice thick with emotion. Robert, please stay for dinner. It's the least we can do to thank you. Robert shook his head gently. Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds, but I think your family needs some private time. I'll come by another day. After the police and Robert left, we all stood there like strangers in a familiar place. Nobody knew what to say. The damage had been done, and everyone knew it. Nina was the first to break the silence. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I panicked when I saw Sophie on the floor. I didn't think— You didn't think, Julie interrupted, her voice like ice. That's exactly the problem. You didn't think before traumatizing a 6-year-old child. I thought my baby was in danger. So your first instinct was to call the police on your nephew, not to check security footage, not to ask what happened, not to give a 6-year-old child the benefit of the doubt? Julie was vibrating with controlled rage. You accused him of attempted murder, Nina. Do you understand how insane that is? I was scared. We're leaving, Julie said, turning to me. Get Ethan. We're going home. I picked up my son, who wrapped his arms and legs around me like he was afraid I'd disappear. He buried his face in my neck, and I could feel his tears soaking through my shirt. Please, my mom said, her voice breaking. Don't leave like this. Let's talk about it. There's nothing to talk about, Julie said, grabbing her purse. You all accused our son of trying to hurt a baby. No amount of apologies can take that back. As we headed toward the door, my dad tried to stop us. Daniel, son, please. We made a terrible mistake, but we're family. Family, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Family believes each other. Family gives each other the benefit of the doubt. What you did today? That's not family. That's a witch hunt. We left. The drive home was silent except for Ethan's occasional hiccuping sobs. Julie reached back and held his hand the entire way. When we got to our house, I carried him inside and sat with him on the couch. Julie sat on his other side, and we just held him while he cried. I tried to save the baby, he kept saying. I really tried, Dad. I know you did, buddy. You were very brave. Why didn't they believe me? That question. That's the one that's been haunting me for months now. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that adults sometimes fail them? That the people who are supposed to protect them can hurt them? That trust isn't automatic, even within family? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I finally said. Big mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes hurt people we love. The days after were rough. Ethan started having nightmares, waking up crying about police and people yelling at him. He became clingy, not wanting to let Julie or me out of his sight. We had to help him work through it, taking him to someone who specialized in helping kids process trauma. I won't call it what it was, but he needed professional help to deal with what had happened. The first nightmare happened that very night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to Ethan screaming. Not crying, screaming like someone was hurting him. I ran to his room and found him sitting up in bed, eyes open but not really seeing, just screaming about police taking him away. Julie and I spent the next hour holding him, telling him he was safe, that nobody was taking him anywhere. This became our routine for weeks. Every night, sometimes multiple times per night, Ethan would wake up terrified. During the day, he'd follow me from room to room, even standing outside the bathroom door because he was afraid I'd disappear. He stopped wanting to go to school. The first Monday after the incident, he clung to Julie's leg in the school parking lot, crying and begging not to be left alone. His teacher noticed the change immediately. Mrs. Patterson called us in for a conference, concerned about Ethan's sudden behavioral shift. He'd gone from a happy, engaged student to a withdrawn child who flinched at loud noises and refused to participate in group activities. We had to explain what happened, and I watched this woman's face go from concern to absolute horror as we told the story. That poor baby, she kept saying, and I knew she meant Ethan, not Sophie. My phone was constantly blowing up with calls and texts from my parents and Nina. Apology cards started arriving in the mail. Small gifts for Ethan, toys, books, things that were supposed to make up for falsely accusing him of attempted murder. Julie refused to let any of it through. She'd intercept the mail, throw away the gifts, and block the calls. One package came with an expensive remote control car, the kind Ethan had been wanting for months. Julie took one look at it, walked straight to the outdoor trash bin, and threw the whole thing in without even opening the box. When I asked if that was necessary, she gave me a look that could have melted steel. They don't get to buy their way back into his life, she said. Not after what they did. They can sit with their guilt and think about their choices. The texts from my dad were particularly hard to read. He'd alternate between apologizing and trying to justify what happened. We thought we were protecting Sophie. You have to understand how it looked. We never meant to hurt Ethan. Each message made me angrier, because it showed he still didn't fully get it. They hadn't just made a mistake. They'd fundamentally failed to trust their grandson when he needed them most. They could have trusted him, she'd say during those long nights when Ethan would wake up screaming. Nina didn't have to call the police. She chose to. She chose to believe the worst about our son instead of investigating what actually happened. That's not something a gift basket fixes. The breaking point came about 3 weeks after the incident. My dad showed up at our house unannounced, walking right in like he still had that privilege. I was working from home, and Ethan was in the living room building with blocks. The second Ethan saw his grandfather, he dropped the blocks and ran upstairs. The fear on his face was immediate and visceral. My dad stood there in our entryway, watching his grandson flee from him, and something in his expression crumbled. Daniel, you need to leave, I said, my voice flat. I just want to talk to him, to apologize properly. He doesn't want to talk to you. Did you see how he reacted when you walked in? That's what you did to him. He's scared of you now. I'm his grandfather. You're the man who didn't believe him when he needed you most, I corrected. And until he decides he's ready to see you, you don't get to just show up here. We stood there in this standoff, and I watched my dad's face go through about 5 different emotions before landing on anger. You're being ridiculous. He's a child. He'll get over it. Get out of my house. Daniel, get out or I'll call the police. See how you like having cops show up because of family drama. He left, but not before saying something that still makes my blood boil. You're turning him against us. This is your fault for coddling him. My fault. For protecting my son from people who'd traumatized him. For refusing to force a scared kid to face the people who'd scared him. For establishing boundaries that put Ethan's well-being first. Yeah, I'm the problem here. That night I told Julie what happened. She was furious that my dad had come over without permission. But more than that, she was hurt that he still didn't seem to understand the gravity of what they'd done. They think this is about us being stubborn, she said. They don't get that this is about Ethan's basic sense of safety. They destroyed that. And now they're mad that we won't let them waltz back in and pretend everything's fine. My mom kept trying to visit. She'd show up at our door with cookies or casseroles, crying and apologizing. The first few times, I sent her away. Ethan would see her car pull up and go hide in his room. That's what really broke my heart. Seeing my son afraid of his grandmother. After about 6 weeks, I let her in. She sat in our living room, and I made it clear that she needed to hear what I had to say. Mom, what happened that day wasn't just about Nina calling the cops. It was about all of you. You, Dad, Nina. Immediately assuming the worst about Ethan, a 6-year-old child who has never, ever shown violent behavior. You chose to believe he'd hurt a baby instead of considering any other explanation. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I hate myself for it. Every day I wake up and remember how scared he looked, and it kills me. Good, I said, and I meant it. You should feel terrible, because Ethan will remember this for the rest of his life. He'll remember that his family thought he was capable of hurting a baby. That's not something that goes away. Can we fix this? She asked. Please, Daniel, tell me how to fix this. I don't know if you can, I admitted. Trust is like glass. Once it's broken, you can glue the pieces back together, but it'll never be the same. There'll always be cracks. She left that day with no promises, no guarantees that we'd ever go back to the way things were. Because we wouldn't. We couldn't. Nina tried to call multiple times. I finally answered after 2 months, more out of exhaustion than forgiveness. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to justify her panic. I listened for about 5 minutes before I cut her off. Nina, here's what I need you to understand. You didn't just accuse Ethan of pushing Sophie. You called the police on a 6-year-old child. You traumatized your nephew because you jumped to conclusions. And the worst part? You saw what you wanted to see. You'd already decided that morning that Ethan was jealous, that he was a threat. So when Sophie fell, you saw what you expected to see instead of what actually happened. I was scared. Being scared doesn't give you the right to destroy a child's sense of safety and trust. Being scared doesn't justify what you did. I don't know how to make this right, she said, her voice small. Maybe you can't, I told her. Maybe that's something you'll have to live with. Summer came and went. Ethan slowly started getting better, but there were changes in him that couldn't be undone. He became more cautious, more guarded. The open, trusting kid who'd loved visiting his grandparents was gone, replaced by someone who looked at extended family with wariness. By fall, we'd established some boundaries. My parents could visit once a month, supervised, at our house. Ethan was polite to them but distant. He'd hug them goodbye because we'd taught him to be respectful, but there was no enthusiasm in it, no joy, just obligation. Nina wasn't allowed around at all for the first few months. When we finally did let her visit in late October, Ethan refused to come downstairs. He stayed in his room playing with his toys, while she sat in our living room holding Sophie, tears running down her face as she realized what she'd lost. He won't even look at me, she said. Did you expect him to? Julie asked, her voice still cold after all those months. You called the police on him. Nina 6-year-olds don't forget that. The holiday season approached, and my parents kept asking if we'd come for Christmas. Julie and I discussed it multiple times. Ethan overheard one of these conversations and immediately said no. He didn't want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house for Christmas. They didn't believe me, he said, his voice matter of fact. Why would I want to go there? We ended up hosting Christmas at our house that year. My parents came over, along with Julie's family. Nina wasn't invited. My dad asked why, and I told him straight. Because Ethan doesn't want her here. And after what happened, his comfort matters more than anyone else's feelings. Watching my parents try to connect with Ethan that Christmas was painful. They brought him expensive gifts, trying to buy back his affection. He thanked them politely, the way we'd taught him, but there was no excitement. He was going through the motions because it was expected, not because he wanted to. That night, after everyone had left and Ethan was asleep, Julie and I sat in the living room, looking at the mess of wrapping paper and empty boxes. Do you think he'll ever trust them again? Julie asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me hopes he does, for his sake, but another part of me thinks maybe he shouldn't. Maybe he learned an important lesson about how even family can hurt you. He's 6 years old, Julie said, her voice breaking. He shouldn't have to learn lessons like that yet. She was right, he shouldn't have. But he did. It's been almost a year now since that April afternoon. Ethan turned 7 last month. We threw him a birthday party at our house, invited his school friends, some kids from the neighborhood, Julie's family. My parents came, but only for an hour. Nina sent a gift but didn't ask to attend. She's learned to respect the boundaries we've set. Ethan's doing better. The nightmares have mostly stopped. He's back to being a mostly normal 7-year-old who loves building with blocks and playing with his toy cars. But there are still moments when I see the change in him. The caution when meeting new people. The way he watches adults carefully, like he's trying to predict what they might accuse him of next. Last week, we were at the grocery store and a toddler in a shopping cart reached out and knocked over a display of cans. The mother immediately looked around to see who'd done it, and I saw Ethan take a step back, hands behind his back, making sure he was clearly not near the mess. A 7-year-old kid already knows to establish his innocence before anyone can accuse him of something. That's what Nina's panic and my parents' instant judgment did to my son. They taught him that he needs to prove his innocence instead of being presumed innocent. They taught him that family won't necessarily have his back when things go wrong. Robert, the neighbor who saved us with his security footage, has become more of a grandfather figure to Ethan than my own dad. Robert has Ethan over sometimes to help him with yard work or small projects. Ethan trusts him in a way he doesn't trust my parents anymore, because Robert was the one who believed in him when it mattered. My relationship with my parents is cordial, but strained. We see each other once a month, maybe twice. We have surface-level conversations about work and weather. We don't talk about what happened unless Ethan brings it up, which he sometimes does. Last month, completely out of nowhere, Ethan asked me during dinner, Dad, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa believe me that day? Julie and I exchanged looks. We'd been over this before, but kids need to process things multiple times before they really understand. Sometimes adults make very bad decisions when they're scared, I told him. They forgot to think before they acted, and that hurt you, which was wrong. Will they do it again? That question gutted me. I don't know, buddy, but that's why Mom and Dad are always here to protect you. We'll never let anyone hurt you like that again. He nodded, satisfied with that answer for now. But I know this question will come up again as he gets older and starts understanding the situation better. One day he'll realize that his aunt accused him of attempted murder. One day, he'll understand that his grandparents sided with her instead of believing him. One day he'll have to decide whether he wants these people in his life. And honestly, I don't know what he'll choose. Part of me hopes he'll forgive them, because forgiveness is healing, and holding grudges hurts the person doing the holding. But another part of me respects whatever decision he makes, even if that decision is to keep his distance from people who failed him when he needed them most. Nina's trying. I'll give her that. She sent a long letter last month apologizing again, explaining that she's been working on herself, that she understands what she did was unforgivable, but hopes one day Ethan will let her be part of his life. The letter was well written, thoughtful, clearly something she'd spent time on. I showed it to Ethan. He read it slowly, his 7-year-old brain working through the big words and concepts. When he finished, he handed it back to me and said, "I'm not ready to see her yet." "That's okay," I told him. "You get to decide when you're ready, if ever." Did Aunt Nina mean to hurt my feelings? I don't think so. I think she was scared for Sophie and reacted badly. But that doesn't make what she did okay. He thought about this for a minute. When I hurt someone's feelings by accident, I have to apologize and they usually forgive me. That's true. But this feels bigger than that. It is bigger than that, I agreed. What happened to you was very serious. Aunt Nina didn't just hurt your feelings by accident. She accused you of something very bad and called the police. That's different from accidentally saying something mean at school. He nodded slowly, processing this. Then he went back to playing with his blocks. The conversation over, for now Julie and I have talked extensively about how to handle this long term. Do we encourage reconciliation? Do we let it heal naturally? Do we accept that our family might be permanently fractured? There's no handbook for this situation. No guide on how to repair relationships after false accusations and police involvement. What I do know is this. Ethan's well-being comes first. Always. If that means limiting contact with my parents and sister, so be it. If it means missing family gatherings or holiday dinners, fine. Our job as parents is to protect our kid, even if that protection is from other family members. My dad called last week asking if we'd come to Thanksgiving at their house. I told him we'd think about it. After I hung up, Julie and I discussed it, then asked Ethan what he wanted. "I don't want to go to their house," he said simply. "Can they come here instead?" So that's what we're doing. Thanksgiving at our house, on our terms, where Ethan feels safe. My parents can come if they want. For a few hours, Nina will not be invited. Maybe next year. Maybe the year after. Maybe never. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.